Hoods have varied all around the world, but they all do the same thing. The whole idea is to prevent the bird from seeing, and if it doesn't see anything, it isn't frightened of anything. They're particularly useful, for example, in transporting the bird. They're handy in the field. If more than one falcon is being flown, the other falcons don't get excited about the flight. I've literally stood on a railroad platform and had a locomotive go by 4 feet away with a hooded bird on my fist, and the bird never flinched, never moved a muscle. So they are a calming thing, and they do the bird a great deal of good. We are told that they came into Western falconry, brought by Arab falconers into Europe by Frederick II in the 13th century. An avid falconer, he was interested in all the techniques, and clearly the hood concept came out of those origin areas of the Middle East and Central Asia. You look at the pictures of hoods in Frederick's book, and they are a crude thing. But even up until, say, 25 years ago, the hood that's used in that part of the world with a sort of an accordion back and long braces. And it gives you some idea that it wasn't really an elegant thing. Over the centuries, the hood was embellished, much more beautifully crafted, with jewels sometimes and precious metals. The high point of European hoods is this hood made by Karl Mollen, who died in 1936. And he was the last member of the old Mollen family, who was renowned in the 19th and 20th centuries from Valkenswaard as the prime origin of falconry equipment. And this was the hood that he made. And despite all the advances that the Europeans had made, despite all the elegance that they had developed in their hoods, this thing is something of a travesty. It's heavy, it's stiff. The beak opening you can see there is square. It does not conform to the formation of the birds around the bird's beak. And it is little wonder that most of the old falconry books, particularly at the end of the 19th century, for example, had a whole chapter on just how to get this thing on a bird's head. It was pretty grim, to say the least. The birds didn't like them. Unfortunately, that was the hood, the standard out of Europe, when falconry first began to flower in the United States. The earliest record we've got of an early American hood, at least, was a man named Thomas Morton, who followed the Pilgrims by only a couple of years. But when he came to America, his memoirs note that he brought his lures and his bells and his hoods with him. This was the standard in the 30s when we were beginning to blossom in falconry here. A man named Lawrence White in Philadelphia, he was a shop teacher, I believe, took up making equipment for the group of falconers around Philadelphia. He modeled his hoods after the European form, the Mollen form, but unfortunately, Mr. White was not the craftsman that the Mollens were. And one look at this shows you that you might need 2 chapters in the book to get that one on a bird's head. But this was the American standard for a while. Then in about 1940, Bill Russell came out with his first book on American falconry called Falconry, a Handbook for Hunters. And in that book was the address of a European falconer who was a hood maker, a man named Otto Kulz. And Kulz made very, very nice hoods, infinitely beyond this, and even as good as the Mollen. And my old mentor, Maynard Stevens in California, took up a correspondence with Otto Kulz and learned about Kulz's methods of making hoods. And Stevens himself probably produced the first really quality molded hoods, what we would call a Dutch hood, a hood that is stiff and molded on a form. Unfortunately, in the development of this, Mr. White was set the standard, and hoods were costing maybe $2.50 to $4. So when Stevens came up with a really fine hood, he felt that it was worth $15 for this. And falconers were horrified at this grotesque overpricing of a hood, and consequently, they were very little purchased and very little known in America. So most Stevens hoods are unknown to America and his role in American hood making. The other thing that was interesting in the same book was this pattern of what he called an Anglo-Indian hood, which is really someone had taken a classic stiff Indian hood, cut the seams, added braces to the back, and made it what became an Anglo-Indian hood. And this became very popular because it didn't take a form. You didn't have to have this model hawk head, this form that you stretched the classic Dutch style over to make it. And all of a sudden, the kid down the street could make one of these. Gosh knows I tried, and it surely gave me a great appreciation for American hood makers today. But the hood that came out of that, this one happens to be without braces, but this is the sort of hood that you would get out of the Russell pattern. But as I say, this was the standard, but Americans did not come from a falconry tradition. They started their own. They weren't not constrained by rules and regulations or commonplace things that the way other things are done. And consequently, this hood engendered all kinds of imitations and innovations and iterations. And Luff Meredith, who was considered sort of the granddaddy of all American falconry, adopted this hood pattern additionally, and he made it so that it sat flat instead of having the sides come up. He did add the braces, and this one he indicated was to be made to be molded. And when I think of mold, I think of the European mold, but Luff's idea on this was simply you wet the hood, you put it over the end of a broom handle, and then you pound with a hammer around the seams to give it a little shape. Well, as I say, the Americans not going to be bound by any sort of a tradition, and even Meredith's tradition, and so they adapted this one step further, and they started using Meredith's pattern, a modified Indian hood. They used that pattern, put it over a form, put it over a solid model of a bird's head, and stretch it that way, as the European forms were done, or European hoods were being made. And they did extremely well. And one man that reached a great deal of prominence in this country, a very, very competent hood maker, was John Moran. And John made his fame with this type of hood to begin with. And most people consider that a standard Dutch hood, but it made over a form, when in actuality, this hood was made with this pattern, but it was formed over a mold. And John, I must say, for a number of years, no one really recognized that was not a classic formed Dutch hood. He made great innovation to it. He brought in a really well-shaped beak opening, although there were several East Coast falconers that claim the origins of what we would call a smiling beak opening, a glorified beak opening that the Indian hood, it did not fit tightly around the beak. It opened it out. A bird can cast through this hood, which it couldn't with the old hoods. It was made with easily sliding braces, and the seaming and the stitching on these things, they have to be seen to be appreciated. But this is far more than a hawk hat. This is actually a piece of art, and I've known at least Moran has entered those in leather art contests that had nothing to do with falcons or falconry. We also started using this top knot, this leather top knot, sometimes with a Turk's head knot at the base of it. You take the classic Dutch hood, and this, of course, is very stylish and very that is standard on the European ones. But this makes a marvelous handle for a bird to reach up with one foot, and if the hood does not fit really well, off it comes. From what Moran was able to do, now they're using very thin leathers. They are molded on hood forms that are very, very exacting as to hood size. They have a proper beak opening, and I have taken personally to calling this an American hood. The hood collection here in the archives numbers almost 800, and a vast number of these are iterations on this modern American hood that has really changed hood making around the world. Really, this epitomizes what a hood should do. It's got a beak opening that doesn't disturb the bird. It's got a wide enough area around the eyes so it doesn't rub the bird. It's got the braces on the back that allow it to be closed and open easily. It's light enough to where it does not disturb the bird. I mean, you can, despite the old chapters in the old books on how to hood a bird, you can do today. It's not at all unusual to be able to walk up to a bird sitting on a block and just put the hood on his head and away you go, which, 50 years ago would be considered totally unheard of. But this is, to me, the American hood, and I think it's one of the great innovations that this country has made. I'm not trying to be chauvinistic or boast about it, but this is a change that has occurred not just in this country, but around the world. That it set a standard for people. It's unbelievable, the progress that's been made, not the least of which we've made with what we call the American hood.